the book of Numbers, chapter number 12. We're going to start at verse number 10. When you have it, say amen. Need a second, say hold on. The book of Numbers, chapter number 12, starting at verse number 10. The word of God reads, "And when the cloud departed from above the tabernacle, suddenly Miriam became leprous, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned towards Miriam, and there she was, a leper. So Aaron said to Moses, 'O my Lord, please do not let this sin on us, in which we have foolishly and in which we have sinned. Please do not let her be as one dead, whose flesh is half consumed, as they come out their mother's womb.' So Moses cried to the Lord, saying, 'Please heal her, O God, I pray.' Then the Lord said to Moses, 'If her father had spit in her face, would she not be shamed for 7 days? Let her be shut out of the camp for 7 days, and afterwards she may return again.' So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey until Miriam was brought back again." The word of God for the people of God. Praise be to God. Amen. This morning I want to use for a subject, sit down, be humble. Sit down, be humble. Many of us have experienced this. Have you ever seen someone get in a position that you said they do not deserve to be in? There are some folks who have gotten to heights, and you say to yourself, "Lord, why in the world did they get to that position?" You begin to look around and you say to yourself, it must be because they know somebody. Because you've seen them, you don't see anything special about them, and it must be that they're related to the supervisor. Or if they're the supervisor, they must be related to the director. If they're the director, they must know the owner. But you know that there's no way in the world they got to this position all on their own. And so you look at God and say, "God, why is it that I don't get the same level of opportunities that everybody else gets?" And so it seems like God is blessing everybody except us, and it gets a bit frustrating. And so it seems like the folks who get pushed, we think to ourselves, "What's wrong with me? Why is it that it seems like I'm doing the same thing everybody else is doing, but they're getting ahead and I'm not getting anywhere? Why does it seem that God continues to bless them, and I'm looking at my situation and wondering why my blessings have not come? I went to school. I did what I was supposed to do. I didn't go out and have any kids before marriage. I'm trying to find a spouse, a husband, or a wife, and I'm looking around and I don't see much out here. I'm looking and I'm saying to myself, I did what I was supposed to do, God. I follow all your rules and regulations. How come everybody else seems to be getting married? How come everybody else seems to be finding the one? And I'm sitting here lonely by myself. God, what's going on with this?" And sometimes we see the same thing in our church. We look at certain folks and say, "How in the world did they get to that position?" I've seen other folks that work harder than them. I know people that put in more time and effort. How in the world does it seem that so-and-so gets this church, but other people get the church down the way with nobody in it? Why does it always seem that it's somebody who maybe has a special relationship with the bishop, always get these grandiose appointments that they ain't even prepared for, but yet and still I've been doing everything I could. I show up to church. I clean the toilets. I help do everything that I can, but yet and still they get on Easy Street and I got to climb the rough side of the mountain. God, you're blessing everybody else. Why aren't you blessing me? And we can see this a lot of times in our families. We have cousins and nephews or nieces or somebody or brothers and sisters that it seems like they're always getting something. They always seem to be able to find a job. They always seem to be able to get a promotion. They always seem to have financial blessings just fall in their lap. And you're saying, God, what is going on? They barely set foot in the church. I'm there every Sunday. I tithe. I do everything I'm called to do. And it feels like I'm always going in one storm, out of one storm and into another. It always seems like every time I think I'm about to make it, something comes along and knocks me back down. So how in the world is it that my cousin or my brother or my sister or whomever it is always seems to be getting a promotion, always seem to be getting something for free? And I'm sitting here struggling. Lord, explain to me, why are you blessing everybody else except me? This issue is not you are not as good as anyone else. The issue is not that you don't have it all together. The issue is not that God loves them any more than he loves you. The issue is we think God has made a mistake. When we see people that are climbing, when we see people that are doing things in our minds, when we say they don't deserve this or they don't deserve that, we're low-key saying, God, you didn't do this the right way. God, you're not recognizing all the things that I'm doing. For some odd reason, the scales aren't balanced. Some reason you're giving them extra credit when they don't deserve it, God. God, you messed up by putting so-and-so in this position, and you left me where I am, and that's where the birth of all our complaints come from. It's because we look at our situation and we say to ourselves, God, you done made a mistake. God, you messed up some kind of way. I should be further along in my career than I am right now. I should have more money in the bank than I have right now. I should be on top of the world right now. I've done everything that you called me to do, but yet and still I don't have the same things as everybody else. You made a mistake, God. I should be the one that won the lotto. I should have been the one that's on the TV screens. I should be the one that does this, and I should be the one that does that. And we look at other people and we envy their gifts and we complain about them because we say to ourselves, I should be in that position. God, you have messed up. Every time we complain, every time we gripe about our position, we're basically saying, God, you don't know what you're doing. There's no way that I should be where I'm at right now. I trust and believe in you, sort of, but I think that you've made some mistakes in your calculations and I should be in a different position than you have me right now. But the good news about God is this. Even when we complain about him, even when we don't trust him like we should, God always shows us grace and mercy. Even when we're ungrateful, even when we're unappreciative, even when we don't know how to act, God still shows us grace and mercy. And you want to know that God can do this if you look at your own children. There's plenty of times, especially they were teenagers, they were some ungrateful so-and-sos. Anytime you did something for them, they expected it to happen. They thought that they should just be able to get $100 pairs of shoes. They thought they should be able to get cars. They thought they should be able just to get any of these things and not have to work for it. But yet and still, you still took care of them. You still fed them. You still clothed them. You did the best that you could because they were your child and you loved them. That's how you know God loves us the same way. Because as much as we complain, as much as we gripe, as much as we moan, as much as we throw a hissy fit because things don't go our way, God doesn't throw us away. God still loves us. He still provides for us. He still takes care of us. And many times we get so caught up longing for grace that we forget that many times God shows us mercy. We don't always get everything that we deserve. When we look back over our lives, we realize there's some times that we should have been dead. There's some times we should have been taken out. There's some times where God should have threw his hands up and said, I'm done with you. But yet and still, he showed us grace and mercy even in the midst of our situation. So you might be thinking, preacher, where do you see grace and mercy in this text? I'm glad you asked. In our text, we find that we're in Numbers chapter number 12. The children of Israel had just came out of bondage. They had just left, they had exited out of Egypt, and they were on their way to the promised land. After they got out of Egypt, after God had lifted them, after God opened up a path through the Red Sea, he brought them to Mount Sinai. He gave them the law, and he told them, this is how you're going to live. This is how you're going to separate yourself from all the other cultures. And so he's teaching them on the mountain. He's getting them prepared. And when the book of Numbers opened up, people wonder why it's called Numbers, because the book opens up with a census. And God says, I want you to count all the fighting men, 20 years to about 50 years old. And he says, once you do that, then I want you to line up in formation. God was getting them ready for battle. And so God finally gets them together. And so after he gets them together, he gets ready to send them to their destiny. Because God had promised Abram, who became Abraham, way back when he was Ur Chaldeans, that he was going to make him into a mighty nation. He took him to the land of Canaan and said, I'm going to give you everything that you see. All this is going to be yours. And Abraham kept the faith even after he was long gone. And then when it went on to his son Isaac and then Jacob, and even Joseph said, when you get up out of here, take my bones with you. Because if God said he's going to do it, I might be dead and gone, but God is going to deliver like he said he was going to do. So they're on their way to the promised land. They're on their way to their destiny, and God has given them some orders. He's given them some things to do, and so they're ready to roll. And in chapter number 10, it looks like everything is going well, but then all of a sudden, in chapter number 11, they begin to complain. After God had provided for them, after God had done everything for them, they begin to complain. They said, God, why'd you bring us down here? Just for us to not have anything to eat. I'm so tired of eating this manna. I'm so tired of eating this bread. It's getting on my nerves every day. Manna, manna, manna. I know what the children of Israel are talking about, because I remember as a young child, one time we had hamburger like every day. I said, oh my God, can we get something else? And another time we ate chicken like every night. I said, Lord, can I get a burger? Can I get something else? I knew what they were talking about, but yet and still they didn't realize they were some ungrateful somethings, because God, this manna just fell from out the sky. They didn't have to work for it. They didn't have to do anything. And it fed at least 600,000 men. We're not talking about women and children. So God was providing for them, but yet and still they didn't want to hear what God had to do. And so, even with all this, they were complaining to God. Said, God, we want some meat. So they go to Moses, and Moses prays to God and says, God, these your people. Now, you don't put this burden on me. These your people, you need to take care of them. I can't hold this up by myself. And so what they did was, God says, I'm going to get 70 elders to help you. So he uplifted people to help Moses. And after that, God says, get prepared. I'm gonna have y'all eating so much meat, it's going to come out your nose. And Moses was like, well, hold on now. God, I can kill animals every day. Ain't going to be enough animals to kill for them to have meat every day. But God says, is my arms too short? You think anything's impossible to me? So God caused quails just to come and fall on the ground, and they just picked up quails like it was nothing. And the Lord took care of them, even though they complained. But then in chapter 12, something interesting happens. Moses' brother and sister, Aaron and Miriam, begin to complain about Moses. Now look at their first complaint. The complaint opens up in chapter 12. The Bible says that they complained because Moses had married a Cushite woman. Now, if you don't know anything about biblical geography, Cush was a land that was south of Egypt. That would be probably modern-day Sudan. They were also referred to as Ethiopians. So the chances is they look more like me and you than anybody else. But they were upset that Moses had married this Cushite woman. It was, and according to the text, the way the text suggests, it was a lot more Miriam than Aaron. And so Miriam and Aaron are having themselves a gripe session. Say, how in the world can Moses marry this foreign woman? Now you got to understand the Jews believed in ethnic purity, and so for the most part they tried to keep to themselves, and so they didn't want anybody else coming in. But if you notice, that's how they opened up their complaint, talking about he had married a Cushite woman, an Ethiopian woman. They talking about he had married this woman. Now we don't know for sure if it's his wife Zipporah, because Zipporah was said to be a Mennonite, and Mennonites and Cushites were in different areas. But there are some scholars who believe that that's who they was talking about. Now, if they were talking about Zipporah, they need to leave Zipporah alone, because if it wasn't for Zipporah, Moses wouldn't even be where he was at. Because when Moses got ready to go back, the Bible says that God's anger burned against him and he was about to kill Moses. But Zipporah saved her son's life and his life also. And so she had held them down, because remember, Moses was raised 40 years in Pharaoh's house. And then he raised another 40 years out in Midian. So Moses wasn't even around no Israelite women to get with anyway. And so he married who he married. And so now they're talking bad about Moses, saying Moses had married this Cushite woman. Why in the world is he marrying her? Then they kept complaining about that. Not only were they complaining about that, but they said that how come Moses is the only leader? See, oftentimes times the thing you complain about is not the real issue. Some of y'all been married, you know you complain about the dishes not being washed, but the real issue is your spouse ain't spend no time at home, so that's why you upset. So instead of talking about that, you put it off on the dishes. So they was talking about his wife, but the real issue was they thought, how in the world is she going to come in and supersede us? Because you got to remember, his brother Aaron was the high priest. His sister Miriam had a lot of say-so. They didn't want somebody else coming and take their shine. And oftentimes, the true issue of our complaints are that we're jealous and petty, and we don't want to see nobody else get ahead. We're so arrogant that we think that we are better than somebody else. Something interesting happens, though, in chapter number 12. They're complaining by themselves, and all of a sudden, God shows up at the tent of meeting. And God calls all three of them out. He says, Moses, Aaron, Miriam, y'all come on out. And so when they come out, he tells Aaron and Miriam, I want y'all to understand something. I talk to other prophets through dreams, and I talk to them in riddles, but I talk to Moses face to face like you talk to your friend. The fact that I talk to him that closely, what would give you the idea that you would think it's okay to talk about my servant? Moses has done everything I've asked him to do. You need to go and check yourself. You need to realize that you don't know who you're dealing with. And so this is what we have to ask ourselves. In the midst of our complaining, what can we learn from Miriam's situation? Well, point number one, we can learn that sometimes we learn that God moves. The text says that he moved in to tell them that he wasn't having it. But here in verse number 10, it says that he moved away. And when he moved away, that's when you notice something was different. See, oftentimes God's movement reveals who we really are. When God has moved in your life and blessed you and you didn't thank him, guess what? That shows where your heart truly is. When God has moved in your life and you had a praise and a gratefulness on your lips, that shows where you really are. When God moves in your situation, God is moving to see what's truly on the inside. Because a lot of us, when we're going through our issue, we say, Lord, if you get us out of this, if you fix this, if you change this, I'm going to do this. There's plenty of people I know that have been drunk talking about, Lord, if you ever get me through this, I'm never going to drink again. But then 2 weeks later, they back with a bottle in their hand getting drunk, saying, well, God is a forgiving God. God may have moved in your situation, but he wants to see who you truly are. And so when it says God moves, Aaron looks over and sees that his sister has turned ghost white. That would lead us to believe that she wasn't always that color. That means that she wasn't always on the fair skin, and so her skin showed up white. And so the text also suggests that since she was the only one who caught this leprosy, this skin disease, the fact that she was the main protagonist, because when you read the text, it's almost suggested that she was the main one griping, but Aaron was there co-signing. Now, a lot of us, we won't gripe about something, but we'll show like, yeah, you're right. That sure makes sense. You're just as bad as the person that's complaining. So just as much as people want to complain, don't be the person that somebody can complain to. My mama always says, if you bring a bone, you'll take a bone. And so that way, when people come to complain to you about somebody on your job saying, Susan will never do this or that and the other, you have to think to yourself, what in the world are you telling Susan about me? Because the same ones that go and spread mess, that's the same one that keep mess going. And so the text says that he looks over and sees his sister has turned white, ghost white. And so now Aaron is stuck looking at his sister, as it says that she has a defiling skin disease. So some Bible verses says that she had leprosy. Some people say she had a skin disease. So what we have to understand in the Bible, leprosy was a blanket term for any kind of skin disease, which could be something we don't take seriously today as psoriasis, which we know is just something that just happens, but goes all the way to something called, like what we can call today Hansen's disease, which is modern day leprosy. And so she had something that made her know that she had this skin disease. And what you have to understand is in chapter 5 of Numbers, it tells you if anybody has one of these skin diseases, you had to put them outside the camp. And so he looks over and sees his sister going through. When Aaron sees his sister going through, and that's point number 2, you got to be mindful. He's mindful of what he's just done. And so what does he do? He says, Lord, please don't treat us like this for these sins we foolishly have committed. See, oftentimes we don't realize that we commit sins foolishly. There's some sins that we do blatantly, and there's some sins we do because we just ain't thinking right. And complaining is one of those things that just flow out of us because we're not thinking about what we're doing. We're not mindful of what we're saying. Oftentimes we complain about stuff and don't realize how good God has truly been to us. We complain about not having this and not having that. But if we look down the way, we realize that there's some people that are worse off than us. And so instead of complaining about our situation, we should be grateful and know that, guess what? If God is blessing them down the street, he's on his way to us. I was hearing a praise report from our good friends, Pastor Braun and First Lady Braun, saying even in the midst of this coronavirus, they had added somebody to the church. And I said, well, that's just a blessing. I was celebrating for them because I said, if God is moving in Kingsport, that ain't but down the road from Johnson City. So if he can bless them there, he can bless me right here. I don't get jealous when other people are doing well. I say to myself, I'm trying to get where they are. Let me see what you're doing. Let me get around you, because if sometimes you get blessings just from being around just the right kind of people. And so Aaron looks at his sister and he says, don't let her be like a stillborn infant. This is a pretty graphic image, and so what he's talking about is when, in those days, and even now, I guess, when babies are born stillborn, sometimes the skin can peel off because of the embryonic fluid and stuff, and so it was almost as if she was going to be, I like how the New American Standard Bible says, as if she was dead, as if she was a dead person. And so what Aaron was saying is, don't let this thing kill her. Because sometimes the thing we complain about can kill you. Some of the people you complain about and fuss about, it can end up taking you out as well. Me and my wife got caught up into this crazy Netflix series called the Tiger King. And it's about this man in Oklahoma who had his own private zoo where he kept tigers and lions and things of that nature, right? And bears too. I'm not going to say the rest of it. You get what I'm saying. But anyways, he had these animals, but he was obsessed with this other woman who was trying to put him out of business. And so instead of focusing on him and handling his business, his want to take her down ended up taking him down. And so oftentimes we have to realize sometimes our complaining and fussing and griping can cause us to end up dying. Because there could be a death sentence on our end. And so he looks at his brother and says, Moses, you got to step in on this. And Moses, it's interesting about Moses. Now they're complaining about him, but now they're looking for him to pray for them. Sometimes our biggest blessings is not going to be the revenge that we get. Sometimes our biggest blessings have to help those who talked about us. Sometimes our greatest blessings is to have to be a blessing to somebody who looked down on us. And see, Moses, verse number 3 says that Moses was the most humble man that you had ever seen. And see, sometimes being humble doesn't mean that you self-deprecate and you're putting yourself down. It's just thinking that you're not that great of yourself. And so Moses could have been petty. He could have been like, y'all talking all that smack. Guess what? You go ahead, let God do whatever he's going to do to you. My God has justified me. You've heard people say that, I ain't worried about it. God's going to fight my battles. He's going to bring all of y'all down. He's going to tear all of y'all up. How humble. Maybe some of what you're going through is a product of something that you've already done. Maybe you're getting what you deserve. Stop acting like everything that bad happens to you that is some product of the devil. Sometimes it's God trying to teach you something, and other times you're just reaping what you sowed. And so Moses prayed and said, God, please don't let this be the end. And so point number 3, sometimes you got to take a moment. The text says that he's praying to God. He says, God, don't let this be the end. Don't take her out for this. And what's interesting is God said something interesting. And it sounds kind of vulgar. So we're going to walk through this. He says, if her father spit in her face, wouldn't she be disgraced for a week? So let's pause right there for a second. Now, what you have to understand is, just like today, in those days, spitting in somebody's face was one of the worst things that you could do, right? The text, if you remember when Jesus was headed to the cross, the text said they spat on him. That was the sign of disgrace and showing that, it was a sign of disgust. So if in those days, if your father was to spit in your face. First off, it made you ceremonially unclean to have somebody else's bodily fluids on you, for one. But for two, it was a sign of great disgrace. So that means you must have done something so bad that your daddy spit in your face to not only make you ceremonially unclean, but showing how despised they was of this. And notice that God asks us a question. And like I always say, when God asks a question, it's not that he don't know the answer. He wants you to recognize what's going on. And so he says, if her father spit in her face, would she not be disgraced for 7 days? In other words, Moses, she better be glad this is the only thing that I'm doing. She gonna, and so God decides that he is not going to give her the full wrath of what he should, because not her complaint about Moses wasn't just saying that she was mad about his wife. It was also saying that God didn't know what he was doing, that God didn't have this under control, that God should have just let somebody else lead, that she knew better than God. Remember in the book of Job, when Job kept saying he wanted to put God on trial, what did God do in chapter 38? God showed up and said, oh, you can do my job. Oh, you know more than I do. And oftentimes we need to remind ourselves that. I love that text because it makes you feel how small you are. God is saying, you weren't here when I set the world together. You don't know the dimensions of this, that, and the other. You don't know how all this stuff intricately works together, but you know how you can do my job better than you. Sometimes God has to remind us with certain things that you don't have it all figured out. You don't know everything. He has it all under control. He has the whole world literally in his hands. And many of us sit here and we try to act like we know more than God. We got it all figured out, that we have it all fixed, that we know everything. And we say, no, I don't do that. But how come when you pray, you only pray for the things you think God can fix and don't trust him with everything? How come when you get your money, instead of tithing like you're supposed to, you hold back a piece because you don't trust that God's going to do anything better than what he's already done? How come when you come to church, you don't come with some kind of expectation that God's going to turn around your situation? You come just trying to get happy for about an hour so you can go home and solve your problems yourself. If you truly trust God the way you say you do, you should give him everything. And so he says she's going to be outside the camp for 7 days. And so when you look at this, oftentimes we say, man, that's rude, that's mean, God, that you just put her out for you gave her this leprous disease and put her out for 7 days. You don't see the grace that's in this text. The mercy that's in this text. God could have killed her right then and there. But he didn't. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a moment and think about what you've done. Go on, sit over there. God basically put her in timeout, because what you have to understand is to be outside of the camp was to be this. You were outside of the society, meaning there was no real social interaction. You were outside of your family, meaning your family would kept their distance from you. And the other thing is you were outside of God, because God's presence literally dwelled at the tabernacle at the center of the society. So now she was on the outside looking in. And sometimes God puts us on the outside to make us appreciate what we had on the inside. There's plenty of times you hear folks when they go to jail, all of a sudden they writing about the stuff they miss. And sometimes it's simple stuff like, man, I wish I could just go to Pal's and get me a cheeseburger. I wish I could go to Walmart and go get me something to drink. I wish I could just go and do this. That's the same thing many of us are experiencing now. Now that we got this coronavirus outbreak, you took for granted how you could just run to the store and get what you wanted. You took for granted that if it's at 9:30, you want to make some cookies, you could just run to the grocery store and get anything that you want. You took for granted that you could just go watch a movie anytime you so choose. And sometimes God has to put us on the outside to help us appreciate what we had on the inside. There's plenty of men and women that are in marriages and saying to themselves, oh, they ain't doing this and they ain't doing that. I'm going to find somebody better. But it's usually once you get outside that you realize grass ain't always green on the other side. Sometimes that grass is brown and it's spray painted green. Sometimes it's not what you think it is. And so when you get over there, you realize that this is not what I thought I was getting myself into. And you have to understand that maybe the reason why God didn't give you what you thought you deserved is because he's saving you from yourself. And so notice what else happens. Though she was outside of the camp for 7 days, the text said that they didn't move until she was brought back in. That means they looked out for her even though she was on the outside of the camp. That they took care of her for those 7 days. They wouldn't leave until she was brought back into the fold. how many of us care for those who are on the outside of the camp? Those people who aren't sitting in the pews, those people who don't know who God is, those people who don't have a relationship. Are you looking out for those on the outside of the camp, or you only care for the people on the inside? And so it also suggests that even God was showing more mercy. Because the Bible says they moved when the cloud lifted it and moved on. But that cloud sat there for 7 days, letting her realize her mistakes. But when she came back, they welcomed her back with open arms. And so, it reminds me of a story. There's a story told of a hurricane that happened in 1969, Hurricane Camille. And they said this hurricane was heading towards the Gulf Coast of the United States, and it was headed straight towards Mississippi. There's a town in Mississippi called Pass Christian, Mississippi, where the storm was said to come straight through. And so everybody had cleared out. The sheriff was in town, helping people to evacuate because the storm was a pretty bad storm. And he goes to this one apartment complex that's like 200 feet off from the beach. And so he says to him, he says, "Hey, we need all y'all to clear out because the storm is going to be bad." And what he didn't realize, the people in the apartment was having a hurricane party. And so they were in the midst of the hurricane saying, "Oh, nah, we good, Mr. Officer. We're gonna ride this thing out." And so he says, "No, the storm is said to be bad. The experts saying it's going to be bad. This looks pretty rough." They said, and one of them yelled out, "Well, officer, this is my land. And the only way you're going to take me out of my land is you're going to have to arrest me." So the cops let them stay and have what they have. Story goes that the storm came through and ripped through specifically that area. And that little apartment complex was torn to pieces. There was 200 people at this apartment complex party, and none of them survived except for a 5-year-old kid that was holding on to a mattress. Because they thought they knew better than the experts. They thought they knew better than God. They knew that they figured, "Oh, we're going to sit here and have our party anyway. We ain't worried about what everybody else says. We're going to do it regardless of what happens." Sometimes God has to do some things to get our attention. And that's what I think this corona outbreak is doing, is God is trying to get our attention. Don't forget about all the things that you used to do. And sometimes we get so caught up doing everything else, we forget about God. How many of us, we're so busy worried about all the things we got to do that day that we don't take the 5-10 minutes to pray and read our Bible? How many of us, we're so worried about trying to get ahead in life that we don't take the time to look out for somebody else? How many of us, because we're so busy trying to be everything to everyone, that we don't do what God tells us to do? Maybe God is telling us through this coronavirus outbreak, y'all need to go sit down and be humble, because you thought to yourself that you had it all figured out. But God is saying you don't have anything figured out, because if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't even have enough sense to do what you have to do. Maybe God is saying the way you thought your medicine was going to save you, and now viruses came up that you didn't even have a medicine for. Maybe you need to sit down and be humble. Maybe God is telling us that in the midst of this corona outbreak, how you put your family on the back burner because it was so important to climb the corporate ladder, and now you don't even have a job to go to. You need to sit down and be humble. Maybe God is telling you that the way you thought you had it all figured out, that you got everything planned, that you had all this stuff planned together, God said, "I can change them plans in a heartbeat." You need to sit down and be humble. Maybe God is telling us that in the midst of this corona outbreak, that even though folks have been going through so much, we haven't been taking the time to look at them. Maybe God is saying, you thought you had a refrigerator full of food, and now you got just as much as the man sitting on the corner. You need to sit down and be humble. Maybe God is trying to tell us in the midst of this corona outbreak, how those times you said, "Oh, I can skip church. I don't need to go every Sunday. I'll take a Sunday off." Maybe God is saying, now you can't even go to church. You need to sit down and be humble, because if God moves, there ain't nothing we can do about it. Unless God moves on our situation, there's no way to change it. I'm here to tell somebody that God is telling all of us we need to sit down and be humble. Stop complaining all the time. Stop crying all the time. Stop being so frustrated all the time, because you don't have any control. God got this all figured out. All of us need to go sit down and be humble.